Hello again, everybody. And again, we're going to have story time with Miss Peggy, and we're doing The Magician's Nephew, this time, chapter 11. I'm just going to show you a picture of the last few things in chapter 10. I know that you'll remember exactly what it's about. You see all those animals chasing Uncle Andrew? They don't mean him any harm. You know that, but he doesn't know that, does he? You may think, by the way, this chapter 11 is called Diggory and his uncle are both in trouble. You may think that the animals were very stupid not to see at once that Uncle Andrew was the same kind of creature as the children and the cabby. But you must remember that the animals knew nothing about clothes. They thought that Polly's dress and Diggory's suit and the cabby's hat were as much a part of them as their own fur and feathers were. They couldn't have known that even those three were all of the same kind if they hadn't talked to them, and if Strawberry didn't seem to think so. And Uncle Andrew was a great deal taller than the children, and a great deal thinner than the cabby, and he was all in black, except for his waistcoat, which was not very white anymore, and his great gray mop of his hair, which now indeed did look very wild. And he didn't look to them like anything they had seen in the other humans, so it was only natural that they should be puzzled, and worst of all, he didn't seem to be able to walk. He had tried to, when the bulldog spoke to him, or as he thought, snarled and then growled at him. He held out his shaking hand and gasped, "Oh, good doggy then, poor old fellow." But the beasts could not understand him any more than he could understand them. They didn't hear any words, only a vague sizzling noise. Maybe it's just as well that they didn't, because no dog I ever heard of liked to be called a good doggy, especially a talking dog of Narnia, any more than you would like to be called, "Oh, my sweet little man." Then Uncle Andrew dropped down in a dead faint. Here he is. Can you see that there? There he is lying down in a dead faint. "There," said the warthog, "it's only a tree. I always thought so." Remember, they had never yet seen anyone faint or even fall. The bulldog, who had been sniffing Uncle Andrew all over, raised his head and said, "I think it's an animal, certainly an animal, and probably the same kind of animal as those ones." "I don't see that," said one of the bears. "An animal wouldn't just roll over like that. We're animals, and we don't roll over. We're animals, and we stand up on our hind legs like this." He rolled up onto his hind legs and took a step backwards, tripped over a low branch, and fell flat on his back. The third joke," said the jackdaw in great excitement. "Well, I still think it's a sort of tree," said the warthog. "Well, if it's a tree," said the other bear, "maybe there's a bee's nest in it." "I'm sure it's not a tree," said the badger. "I have a sort of idea that it was trying to speak before it toppled over." "That was only the wind in its branches," said the warthog. "You surely don't mean," said the jackdaw to the badger, "that you think he's a talking animal? It didn't say any words." "And yet, you know," said the elephant, the she-elephant, of course. Her husband, as you remember, had been called away by Aslan. "And yet, you know, it might be an animal of some sort. Mightn't the whitish lump at this end be sort of a face? And couldn't those holes be eyes and a mouth? No nose, of course, but then one mustn't be narrow-minded. Very few of us have what could be called a nose." And she squinted down the length of her own trunk with pardonable pride. "I object to that remark very strongly," said the bulldog. "The elephant is quite right," said the tapir. "I tell you what," said the donkey brightly, "perhaps it's an animal that can't talk but thinks it can." "Can it be made to stand up?" said the elephant thoughtfully. She took the limp form of Uncle Andrew gently in her trunk and set him up on end. Upside down, unfortunately. so that 2 half-sovereigns, 3 half-crowns, and a sixpence fell out of his pocket. But it was no use. Andrew merely collapsed again. Could I have a little diversion here and talk to you a bit about English money? English money back in those days was based around the pound. You remember that back in one of the earlier chapters, Uncle Andrew had said, "Letitia, my dear, please do lend me £5." Well, the pound was like our dollar, and a pound back in the 1880s or so would be worth about £100 or a little more now. So when he was asking her to loan him £5, he was asking like if you went to your dad and asked him, "Daddy dear, would you please lend me $500?" You might get the same response that he got from Uncle Andrew, from Aunt Letitia, or Aunt Letty as they're calling her. Okay, so now we know that the pound is the foundation of the English money system. A half-sovereign, which fell out of Uncle Andrew's pocket, was a gold coin made out of real gold that was worth half a pound, or 10 shillings. Each pound was 20 shillings. So 10 shillings. So it's worth about $50. And then a half-crown was worth 1/4 of 10 shillings, or 2 and 6, 2 shillings and 6 pence. And so there were 8 of those in a pound. You got all that straight. Then there was a sixpence, which was worth half a shilling. There's 20 shillings in a pound, so a sixpence would be 1/40th of a pound. I'm sure all that makes perfect sense to you. That's what I thought when I lived in England and got my first job selling Christmas decorations at Woolworths, and I had to sell them individually, and they were 2 for 3 pennies and a halfpenny, or 6 for 4 shillings, or things like that. And I had to quickly learn the English money system. And it's changed now. They don't do it like that then. A pound, they still have as a pound, but it has 100 pennies in it, and none of this shillings and halfpennies and half-crowns and half-sovereigns and all that. That's all gone. But at any rate, when the elephant planted Uncle Diggory upside down, all this money fell out of his pocket. 2 half-sovereigns, that would make a pound. 3 half-crowns, that's 7 shillings and 6 pence. And a sixpence fell out of his pocket. But it was no use. Uncle Andrew merely collapsed again. "There," said several voices, "it isn't an animal at all, and it isn't even alive." "I tell you, it is an animal," said the bulldog. "Smell it for yourself." "Smelling isn't everything," said the elephant. "Why?" said the bulldog. "If a fellow can't trust his nose, what can he trust?" "Well, his brains, perhaps," she said mildly. "I object to that remark very strongly," said the bulldog. "Well, we must do something about it," said the elephant, "because it might be the Nevil, and it must be shown to Aslan. What do most of us think? Is it an animal, or something of the tree kind?" "Tree, tree," said a dozen voices. "Very well," said the elephant. "Then, if it's a tree, we need to plant it. We must dig a hole." The 2 moles settled that part of the business pretty quickly. There was some dispute as to which way up Andrew ought to be put into the hole, and he had a very narrow escape from being put in head first. Several animals said that his legs must be his branches, and therefore that gray fluffy thing, by that he meant his head, it must be his roots. But then other ones thought that the forked end of him was muddier and that it was spread out more as roots ought to do, so finally he was planted right side up. And when they had patted down the earth, it came to well above his knees. "It looks dreadfully withered," said the donkey. "Well, of course it needs some watering," said the elephant. "I think I might say, meaning no offense to anyone present, that perhaps for that sort of work, my kind of nose—" "I object to that remark very strongly," said the bulldog. But the elephant walked quietly to the river, filled her trunk with water, and came back to attend to Uncle Andrew. She went on doing this, spraying him with water until gallons of water had been squirted all over him, and water was running out of his frock coat as if he had been taking a bath with all his clothes on. Here he is, right here. Poor Uncle Andrew. In the end, it revived him. He awoke from his faint, and what awakening it was! But we must leave him to think over his wicked deed, if he was likely to do any such thing, and turn to more important things. Strawberry trotted on with Diggory on his back till the noise of the other animals died away, and now the little group of Aslan and his chosen counselors was quite close. Diggory knew that he couldn't possibly break in on so solemn a meeting, but there was no need to do so. At a word from Aslan, the he-elephant, the ravens, and all the rest of them drew aside. Diggory slipped off the horse and found himself face to face with Aslan. And Aslan was bigger and more terrible than he had thought, and he dared not look into those great eyes. "Please, Mr. Lion, Aslan, sir," said Diggory, would you please give me something, some magic fruit from this country to make mother well?" He had been desperately hoping that the lion would say yes. He had been horribly afraid that it might say no, but he was taken aback when it did neither. "This is the boy," said Aslan, looking not at Diggory, but at his counselors. "This is the boy that did it." "Oh dear," thought Diggory, "what have I done now?" "Son of Adam," said the lion, "there is an evil witch abroad in my new land of Narnia. Tell these good beasts how she came here." A dozen different things he might say flashed through Diggory's mind, but he had the sense to say nothing except the exact truth. "I brought her, Aslan," he answered in a low voice. "For what purpose?" "I wanted to get her out of my own world and back into her own. I thought I was taking her back to her own place." "How came she to be in your world, son of Adam?" By magic." The lion said nothing, but Diggory knew that he had not told enough. "It was my uncle, Aslan. He sent us out of our own world by magic rings. At least I had to go because he sent Polly first. And then we met the witch in a place called Charn, and she just held on to us when—" "You met the witch?" said Aslan in a low voice which had the threat of a growl in it. "She woke up," said Diggory wretchedly, and then turning very white. I woke her because I wanted to know what would happen if I struck the bell. Polly didn't want to. It wasn't her fault. I fought with her. I know I shouldn't have. I think I was a bit enchanted by the writing under the bell." "Do you?" said Aslan, speaking in a very low and deep voice. "No," said Diggory. "I see now that I wasn't. I was only pretending." There was a very long pause. And Diggory was thinking all the time, "I've spoiled everything. There's no chance of getting anything for mother now." And when the lion spoke again, it was not to Diggory. "You see, friends," he said, "that before the new clean world I give you is 7 hours old, a force of evil has already entered it, waked and brought hither by this son of Adam." The beasts, even Strawberry, all turned their eyes on Diggory till he felt that he wished the ground would swallow him up. "But do not be cast down," Aslan said to the beast. "Evil will come of that evil, but it is still a long way off, and I will see to it that the worst of it falls on myself. In the meantime, let us take such order that for many 100 years this shall be a merry land and a merry world. And as Adam's race has done the harm, Adam's race shall help to heal it. Draw near, you other two." The last words were spoken to Polly and the cabby, who had now arrived. Polly, all eyes and mouth, was staring at Aslan and holding the cabby's hand even tighter. The cabby gave one glance at the lion, took off his bowler hat. No one had yet seen him without it. And when it was off, he looked younger and nicer and more like a country man than like a London cabman. "Son," said Aslan to the cabby, "I have known you long. Do you know me?" Well, no, sir, said the cabby, leastways not in an ordinary manner of speaking. Yet I feel somehow that, if I may make so free, as how we have met before. It is well, said the lion. You know better than you think you know, and you shall live to know me better yet. How does this land please you? It's a fair treat, sir, said the cabby. Would you like to live here always? Well, you see, sir, I'm a married man, said the cabby. If my wife were here, neither of us would ever want to go back to London. I reckon we're both country folks, really. Aslan threw up his shaggy head, opened his mouth, and uttered a long single note, not very loud, but full of power. Polly's heart jumped in her body when she heard it. She felt sure that it was a call, and that anyone who heard that call would want to obey it, and, what's more, would be able to obey it, however many worlds and ages lay between. And so, though she was filled with wonder, she was not really astonished or shocked when all of a sudden a young woman with a kind, honest face stepped out of nowhere and stood beside her. Polly knew at once that it was the cabby's wife, fetched out of our world, not by any tiresome magic rings, but quickly, simply, and sweetly as a bird flies to its nest. The young woman had apparently been in the middle of washing day, for she wore an apron, her sleeves were rolled up to the elbow, and there were soap suds on her hands. If she had time to put on her good clothes, her best hat had imitation cherries on it, she would have looked dreadful, but as it was, she looked rather nice. Of course, she thought she was dreaming. That's why she didn't rush across to her husband and ask him what in the world had happened to them both. But when she looked at the lion, she didn't feel quite so sure about a dream, yet for some reason she didn't appear to be very frightened. And then she dropped a small curtsy, as country girls knew how to do in those days. And after that, she went and put her hand in the cabby's hand and stood looking around a little shyly. My children, said Aslan, fixing his eyes on both of them, you are to be the first king and queen in Narnia. The cabby opened his mouth in astonishment, and his wife turned very red. You shall rule and name all the creatures, and do justice among them, and protect them from their enemies when enemies arise. And enemies will arise, for there is an evil witch in this world. Cabby swallowed hard 2 or 3 times and cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, sir, and thanking you very much, I'm sure, which my missus does the same, but I ain't no sort of chap for a job like that. I ain't had much education, you see. Well, said Aslan, can you use a spade and a plow and raise food from the earth? Oh, yes, sir, I can do a bit of work like that, being brought up to it like. Can you rule these creatures kindly and fairly, remembering that they are not slaves like the dumb beasts of the world you were born in, but talking beasts and free subjects? I see that, sir, said the cabby. I'll try to do the square thing by them all. And would you bring up your children and grandchildren to do the same? It'd be up to me to try, sir. I'll do my best, wouldn't I, Nellie? And you wouldn't have favorites among your own children or among other creatures, or let any hold or use another hardly? I never could abide such goings on, sir, and that's the truth. I can give them what for if I caught them at it, said the cabby. And through this conversation, his voice was growing slower and richer, more like a country voice that he must have had as a boy, and less like the sharp, quick voice of a Cockney cabman. And if enemies come against this land, for enemies will arise, and there is war, would you be the first in the charge and the last in the retreat? Well, sir, said the cabby very slowly, a chap doesn't exactly know until he's been tried. I dare say I might turn out ever such a soft one. I never did know fighting except with my fists, but I'd try. That is, I hope I'd try to do my bit. Then, said Aslan, you will have done all that a king can do. Your coronation will be held presently, and you and your children and your grandchildren shall be blessed, and some of them will be kings of Narnia, and others will be kings in Archenland, which lies yonder over the southern mountains. And you, little daughter, he turned to Polly, are welcome. Have you forgiven the boy for the violence that he did you in the Hall of Images, in the desolate palace of accursed Charn? Oh, yes, Aslan, we've made it up. Then it is all well, said Aslan. And now for the boy himself. And that's the end of chapter 11. Next time, we'll go to chapter 12, which is entitled Strawberry's Adventure. I know you'll want to be there for that. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.